Well, gotcha enthusiasts, anime enthusiasts, and, I don't know, like, you can be a model train enthusiast, I guess. I don't care what you're excited about as long as you're here and you're watching the video. So, if you build model trains all day, I mean, that's up to you, man. You live your truth. Anyway, we're going to talk about Wuthering Waves once again today. We did our first impressions on some of the very early aspects of the game, the opening narrative and things like that, just how the world looked and felt. Now we're going to dive more into the combat and sort of my impressions on that as a whole during my probably, like, I would say this is kind of my day 2 and 3 impressions for the most part, though it has been, I guess, 5 days now since the game came out, and I have a lot of thoughts, and I am going to make a third part of this to kind of cap off this, I guess, mini-series, you could call it, on my early impressions about the game, but this one is going to be mostly centered around combat and things of that nature. We're going to be kind of dividing this into a few different sections. We'll have a section kind of just talking about what a character's kit looks like, because that feels pretty central to discussing the combat. Then we'll talk about the actual combat itself and how it feels, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the bosses and how they feel, because they're a real high point of the game, I think. And then finally, we're going to talk a bit about the ecosystem, because it's pretty important, a little bit complicated, and a little bit interesting at the same time. So let's go ahead and talk about character kits to start things off. Now, let's get the most basic aspects of a character's kit out of the way. Basic attacks are pretty simple. Those are just your character's normal combos, so nothing to write home about there. Your resonant skill is essentially just, like your elemental skill in Genshin, something like that. It's just an ability that your character can utilize on a cooldown, and then your Resonance Liberation is your ultimate ability. You have to charge it up, get energy for it, and then you can unleash it. All very simple things, pretty universal in these kinds of games to have these sort of mechanics. They also have a couple more things that are a bit more different and a bit more unique to Wuthering Waves' specific system. One of those things are intro and outro skills. As the names imply, they trigger when a character enters the battlefield or when a character exits the battlefield. Now, it is worth noting that this doesn't happen every time you switch characters, only once your character that is currently on the field has built up a separate type of energy from their ultimate energy called Concerto Energy. Now, Concerto Energy maxes out at an amount of 100 energy, and you can gain Concerto Energy from doing various things like perfect dodging and countering. However, many abilities in a character's kit also have a listed value of Concerto Energy that they generate when they use their abilities, ultimates, and things like that. So basically, you have two different kinds of energy: your ultimate energy, which is how you use your Resonance Liberation, and your Concerto Energy, which is how you trigger intro and outro skills. Your intro skill is, for the most part, just pretty simple. It's usually just a burst of damage when you enter the field, but outro skills are much more important, I would say. Now, some outro skills, just like intros, are just bursts of damage, but most of them provide some kind of buff to the character that's coming on the field. For instance, Morteffi's here gives you a heavy attack damage bonus to the next character that enters the field. So they basically, most of them have something like this, whether it's a specific element damage boost, whether it's like heavy attack boost, some form of attack boost to various parts of various people's kits is usually what you're looking at when you're talking about people's outro skills. At least the ones we have so far are mostly falling into that kind of category. Now, there is actually a third kind of energy that your character builds up besides the energy for their ultimate and the energy for Concerto and switching in and out, which is what basically should be called your Forte energy to trigger your Forte ability. Now, your Forte is kind of different depending on the character that you're using. It can be an enhanced skill, an enhanced heavy attack. It can be a couple different things. And technically, it's not called Forte energy because for some reason, every character has a different name for what this energy is called. For instance, Dan Jin's is called Ruby Blossom, and Morteffi's is just called Annoyance, because I guess he just gets annoyed. That makes him stronger. I don't know. I think that's pretty funny that his is just called Annoyance, though. But anyway, you build up this Forte energy, and then you can unleash some kind of powerful attack that is central to your character's kits. So you have, once again, 3 different kinds of energy that your characters are building: the energy for your ultimate, Concerto Energy for triggering intro and outro skills, and Forte Energy, whatever your specific Forte Energy is called, to unleash an enhanced version of your skill, an enhanced basic attack, or some unique ability to your character. And that's about it. Those are the very basic amounts of a character's kit. So a lot of it's pretty basic, like your skill, your basic attacks, your ultimate. But when it comes to intro and outro skills and Forte, I think there's some pretty interesting wrinkles there, and I'm excited to see what, some characters have going forward. I kind of want to see supports in the future that maybe generate Concerto Energy for other units. That way you can switch in and out and trigger outro abilities faster. So I think that would be pretty interesting. So I think there's a lot of directions they can go with this system, and I think it's pretty good. Next, let's talk about the combat and how it feels to chew 5 gum. No, how it feels to do the combat, not chew 5 gum. I don't think I've had 5 gum in a really long time.
The general combat in this game feels incredibly strong, and I think is probably the strongest aspect of the game so far. It feels and looks really good just to do the combat. Now, I've mentioned in this video and in the first video comparisons to Star Rail and Genshin. I feel like this game is going to get more comparisons to Genshin than anything else because, for starters, I mean, they're both open-world gacha anime games, I guess, but also because Genshin has kind of been the golden goose of gacha games that have been able to actually get a lot of staying power in Western markets. So I think that's part of the reason as well why they're going to compare it, because everybody kind of knows what Genshin Impact is. But I really don't think the combat of the two games is similar all that much, really, at all. Genshin Impact's combat is really about investing in a bunch of units that have really good off-field utility or off-field damage, and are good at supporting usually a single on-field unit. Now, there are some comps you can make in Genshin that are very quick swappy, that don't have really one unit that dominates field time, but for the most part, most teams are going to have off-field damage dealers, off-field utility, and then one damage dealer that is on the field almost all the time doing damage, and always usually triggering some form of elemental reactions, because the elemental reaction system is what Genshin Impact's combat is really based around. Now, Wuthering Waves' combat is much more simple in that the elemental reaction system or anything like that doesn't exist. Every character has an element for sure, but like those elements don't really interact with each other in any meaningful way. The real sticking point of the combat in Wuthering Waves is the actual combat itself. It's the mechanics surrounding it, it's the actual act of making sure you're weaving combos in the right way, perfect dodging, countering, breaking opponents' stances, and things like that. So it's less about setting up reactions where you can nuke an enemy like this, and more about just being able to play the game the right way, dodge when you need to dodge, counter when you need to counter, and get your combos in when you can. Now, I don't think one system is inherently better or worse than the other. I think they both do different things, tickle different parts of the brain. You might like one and not like the other. You might like both and you might like neither. I really do enjoy both because I really do like Genshin Impact's combat. I really think the elemental reaction system is great, but I also really think the combat in this game is really good. It feels really fluid. It looks visually really good when you're, dodging around and countering enemies. It just makes you feel really cool, even if all you're doing is mashing the dodge button and then pressing the attack button a whole bunch. So the combat itself, I think, is really, really good and is a really good foundation for building a very good game. I mean, that's what I was talking about earlier, like even when we were doing the first video. Like, the story itself, especially the first parts of it, are not very good, but what carries you through wanting to do the rest of the story, I really think, is the fact that the gameplay itself, the physical act of going around, killing enemies, exploring, opening chests and stuff, is genuinely really, really fun. So I think that does so much for this game, and I really do think the combat is the strongest suit of the game. And I think it is something that is very, very, very important for getting people to continue actually playing the game. Speaking of things that are important and making you want to continue playing the game, let's talk about these guys, the bosses.
Like a boss.
I have a lot of good things to say about the bosses in Wuthering Waves, actually. So the first boss you fight in the game, or the first boss you fight properly in the game, I guess, is going to be the Crownless. And the Crownless really teaches you a lot about dodging and countering and things like that, as most of the time it's walking around and doing attacks that you can counter. Now, there are some times where it flies in the air and does a bunch of rapid attacks that you can't counter but can still perfect dodge, but for the most part, it's there to teach you how to dodge and how to counter, and strictly, you're usually just going to be countering it a bunch to take it down. Now, I kind of thought this was how all the bosses were going to be, and that they would all kind of have visual similarities to this and all look kind of the same, and, No, I was totally wrong. Not only are the bosses fun to fight, but they're actually really visually interesting. Now, some of them do look like the same weird, creepy monster things, like the Thundering Memphis? The Thundering Memphis? Oh no, we're fighting Memphis! And also the Crownless itself. They kind of just look like big old monster things, but there's a bunch of bosses that look completely different. There's a boss that looks really cool that's just like a scrapyard-looking giant robot thing. There's a big monkey. You can fight a big monkey if you want. And then there's like Ghost Rider. You want to fight Ghost Rider? Well, guess what? You can. because reasons. I don't really know why. The bosses are very visually different, and also they don't really fight you the same way. Some of them are much more heavily centered around countering the way Crownless is, but some of them you don't really get nearly as many opportunities to actually guard counter them, and you have to fight them in more conventional ways. So the different bosses do have different tendencies, different abilities, different visual styles, and they all are actually very interesting to fight for the most part, and I really appreciate that. Now, it is worth noting some bosses, or really, I guess all bosses, do resist one particular element, which can actually really hamper you, especially early game, because I was trying to fight the Crownless with my Dan Jin at the very beginning of the game, and it resists her damage type, so that's kind of annoying, but once you get a little bit of level ups in you, it's not really going to matter nearly as much anyway, but the resistance is definitely very noticeable for that element, so that's something to keep in mind. But I really, really do like fighting the bosses, and I don't think there's really a point in the game that highlights how cool it looks when you're guard countering and perfect dodging more than some of these boss fights, because at times, some of these boss fights, when you're just getting combos weaved in perfectly and countering and breaking them in just the right way, it looks super cinematic. It makes you kind of feel like a badass, and I really do appreciate it. The boss fights themselves are super fun, and what's really nice is you can actually farm them without using the game's stamina, your trailblaze fuel, your resin, whatever you want to call it. I think they're called wave plates in this. For some reason, I have no idea what a wave plate is, but hey, they don't pay me to name things around here. Because you can farm them using your stamina, because that allows you to collect the ascension materials you need to level up characters, but just killing the bosses by themselves will let you get the boss's echo, which is also a very important thing, because these boss echoes are some of the important echoes you're going to be needing to get lots of high rarity ones to try to get perfect pieces for the end game. Speaking of that, let's actually go ahead and talk about the echoes, because they're a bit weird. Now, at first I wasn't really sure what the echoes were, but it turns out they're basically the artifact or relic system of Wuthering Waves, with a couple extra steps, a couple twists here and there, and the ability to just turn into one of them for brief periods of time, because for some reason you could just turn into one of them. Like, whichever one you have first in your echo inventory or whatever, you get to turn into that and do a combo or something, and that's kind of cool. Like, you can turn into that cool guy I showed you earlier that's like on fire and has a motorcycle and stuff, and that's pretty cool. But yeah, so basically these have the same things you would expect artifacts or relics to have. They even have set bonuses that increase different damage types and things like that. But the way you get them is completely different, because you get them mostly from farming in the overworld, and I'm not going to get into all the weeds of how exactly echo farming works and how to get the best ones and things like that, because there is actually a lot going on there, but I'll just go ahead and give you the kind of SparkNotes version right now, is that as you collect more echoes, you unlock the ability to get higher rarity echoes, and then once you level up those higher rarity echoes, you can unlock substats for those echoes, and that's kind of how you build endgame gear in a nutshell. I might go into more detail on that when I'm doing the final part 3 of this series, but for the most part, that's just kind of how it goes. So for the most part, I think I just said for the most part like 3 times. So there's that. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and say it again now just to make it a thing. For the most part, the Echo system is really just the artifact or relic system with set bonuses, main stats and substats like you'd be familiar with some of these other games. Once again, we'll probably go into more detail about that in the third and final part of this mini-series, but for now, that's really all I'm going to touch on as far as the Echoes go, and just kind of tell you I do like the system. I think it's fun and neat. I don't have a complete understanding of all the ins and outs of it at the moment because it's still pretty early on, and I haven't been watching a bunch of guides or videos. In fact, I would say I don't know if I've watched any kind of real, tutorial or build guide videos, mostly just because I've been kind of having fun just reading people's kits and learning how the game works kind of at my own pace. And honestly, I think it's pretty easy to do that for the most part. You don't have to, learn some complicated rotations or attack patterns or elemental reactions or anything like that, or some speed break point like you would in Star Rail. You can just kind of do whatever, and if you're, dodging right and countering right and not getting hit and playing smart, you can kind of get the job done. Now, once we get into endgame content, I'm sure that won't be the case, but at least for the moment, for the good chunk of game we've played so far, that is definitely the case. So all in all, the combat is incredible, it's really good, and I really like it. The boss fights are visually diverse and mechanically diverse, maybe not incredibly mechanically diverse, because they all do somewhat similar things, but they don't all play the same, and not all the fights play out exactly the same, so I think that's a win in their book. And then also, once again, the Echo system is kind of interesting and unique, and is a really fresh take, I guess, on sort of the endgame gear system, as opposed to relics and artifacts in games like Star Rail and Genshin. So there's a lot to like here. We'll talk more about the second half of the story in part 3, as well as dive into the weeds on some of these mechanics in depth more. But for now, that's kind of it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've been playing the game. If you like it so far, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell. Do people still ring the bell? Is that what you do? Someone find out if you ring the bell or not, and then if So if ringing the bell is a thing, ring the bell. If it's not, then I guess don't. I mean, if you have a bell at home and you just brought it, I guess you can ring that, but that won't really help me out. Anyway, whenever Camellia comes out, I'm gonna lose my shit.